Be me, Patrick, mid-30s. Senior systems analyst at a decent tech company, not FAANG level, but we get paid well, and the work is interesting. Or at least, it was. My job is basically to be the bridge between the business guys who want shiny new features and the programmers who have to actually make them work without the whole system catching fire. I translate vague corporate wishes into concrete technical requirements. It requires patience, a lot of coffee, and the ability to explain complex problems in very simple terms. For the last 5 years, I've been on the same team, the Olympus project team. It's our company's flagship product, a massive data processing platform. It's our cash cow. Our team is small, but we're a well-oiled machine. There's Robert, our team lead. He's in his early 40s, a quiet guy who doesn't say much, but when he does, you listen. He's one of those rare managers who actually used to be a top-tier developer, so he understands the tech inside and out. He protects us from the worst of the corporate nonsense and trusts us to get our jobs done. He never micromanages. Then there's Everett. The kid is a wizard. He's maybe 25, fresh out of college a few years ago, but he's the best programmer I've ever worked with. The kind of guy who sees code like it's the Matrix. He'll stare at a screen for 10 minutes, completely silent, and then type out 100 lines of flawless code that solves a problem we've been stuck on for a week. He's awkward, doesn't talk much about his personal life, but his loyalty to the team is absolute. The three of us are the core of the Olympus project, the engine room. For years, life was good. The work was challenging, but we crushed every deadline. Our old boss was a guy who basically just signed our expense reports and left us alone because we always delivered. We had a rhythm. We'd have our morning stand-up, get our tasks, put our headphones on, and get to work. We'd eat lunch together, usually talking about movies or video games, never really work stuff. It was a comfortable, professional brotherhood. No drama, just results. We were respected in the company. Other teams would come to us for advice. We felt like we were building something important, and we were good at it. That all changed a few months ago. Our old boss retired, and the higher-ups decided our department needed a leadership refresh. That's corporate speak for, we're bringing in an outsider to shake things up. An email went out introducing our new department head. Her name was Lisa. The email had a picture of her. She had that very specific severe haircut and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her bio was filled with corporate buzzwords: driving cultural transformation, fostering inclusive innovation, challenging established hierarchies. Not a single mention of technical achievements or project deliveries. Robert, Everett, and I were in a meeting room when we got the email. I read it out loud. When I finished, Everett just snorted. Robert stared at the screen for a long moment and just said, "Well, this is going to be interesting." That was Robert's version of screaming in panic. The first day Lisa arrived, she called a mandatory all-hands meeting for the whole department. She walked in, and the first thing I noticed was her energy. It was this weird mix of aggressive cheerfulness and condescension. She started her speech by saying how thrilled she was to be here and how she saw so much untapped potential. She talked for 20 minutes, and it was the most content-free speech I'd ever heard. It was all about changing the culture. She said the company had been too focused on outdated metrics of success and not enough on our people and our values. She kept using phrases like deconstructing the old ways and creating safe spaces for expression. At one point, she looked around the room, which was about 80% men, and said, "We're going to be making some big changes to better reflect the world we live in." The look she gave us wasn't one of a manager looking at her team. It was the look of a zookeeper looking at a cage of unruly animals that needed to be tamed. After the meeting, the three of us went back to our area. Everett was quiet, just shaking his head. I asked Robert what he thought. He leaned back in his chair and said, "She didn't mention the product once, not a single word about Olympus." That was all he needed to say. We knew we were in for a rough ride. The first changes were small but insidious. Our morning stand-up meetings, which used to be a quick 10-minute update on our work, were now an hour long. Lisa insisted on attending every single one. She'd interrupt us to ask how we were feeling about our tasks. If Everett said, "I'm working on the database optimization," she would stop him and say, "But how does that task make you feel, Everett? Do you feel empowered by it?" Everett would just stare at her blankly, unable to process the question. She also introduced a kudos system, where we had to publicly praise a coworker at the end of each meeting. It was a forced, awkward ritual that made everyone uncomfortable. Then came the mandatory weekly workshops. Every Friday afternoon, the most productive time of the week, we had to go to a 2-hour session on topics like unpacking your unconscious bias and allyship in the workplace. The sessions were run by outside consultants who were clearly just friends of Lisa's. They were always the same. We'd sit in a circle while a facilitator talked about privilege and systemic issues. Most of us just tuned out, scrolling through our phones under the table. But Lisa was always there, in the front row, nodding along with this intense, zealous look in her eyes. The breaking point for me came during one of these workshops. The topic was privilege. The facilitator, a guy with a very punchable face, asked us to go around the circle and share an example of how our unearned privilege had benefited us in our lives. A few of the younger guys, probably scared for their jobs, mumbled some generic answers. Then it was my turn. I just said, "I'd prefer to pass, thank you." The facilitator looked a bit flustered. He said, "It's important that we all participate. This is a safe space." I stayed calm and polite. "I appreciate that, but I'm not comfortable discussing this. I'm here to do my job, which is to build software." The whole room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. I saw Lisa at the other side of the circle. She was staring at me. Not with anger, but with a cold, calculating look. It was the look of a scientist who just saw a lab rat refuse to go through the maze. She didn't say anything, just made a small note in a little black book she always carried. I knew right then that I was on her list. After that day, her attitude towards me, Robert, and Everett got noticeably colder. She started questioning our decisions on the Olympus project, even though she had zero technical knowledge. She would come to our desks and ask why we were using a certain programming language, saying she'd heard that other languages were more inclusive. Robert spent hours patiently explaining our technical architecture to her, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Her eyes would just glaze over. She couldn't understand the logic, so she just dismissed it as resistance to change. The atmosphere on the team, once collaborative and fun, became tense and miserable. We stopped talking openly in the office. All important conversations moved to a private group chat. We were in survival mode, just trying to keep our heads down and get our work done despite the constant interference. Then, the big one happened. One of the senior developers on another team, a key guy who maintained a critical part of the system that Olympus relied on, quit. He was leaving for a competitor for a huge pay raise. Can't blame him. This meant we had a critical position to fill, and it needed to be someone good, really good. Robert was put in charge of the technical interviews. Lisa, of course, had to approve the final candidate. We posted the job listing, and the applications started pouring in. Robert and I sifted through dozens of resumes. We were looking for a needle in a haystack. After a week, we found him. A candidate, let's call him Mark. His resume was perfect. 10 years of experience, worked at 2 well-respected companies, had expertise in the exact technologies we used. We brought him in for an interview. He was fantastic. He was sharp, professional, and clearly knew his stuff. Robert gave him a complex system design problem, and he whiteboarded a solution that was elegant and efficient. Then it was Everett's turn for the coding test. Everett is a tough interviewer. He doesn't ask trick questions, he just gives you a real-world problem and sees how you solve it. Mark sat down, and within 30 minutes he had written a piece of code that was not only correct, but also clean, well-documented and performant. Everett came out of the room and just gave Robert a thumbs up. That's the highest praise you can get from Everett. We were all in agreement. This was our guy. He could start next week and probably be contributing to the codebase by day 3. Robert wrote up his recommendation and sent it to Lisa. He told her we had found the perfect candidate and should make an offer immediately. That evening, we got a reply from Lisa. It said, "Thank you for your recommendation, Robert. However, I have another candidate from HR. I'd like you to interview tomorrow. It's important we explore all options." We knew what that meant. The next day, the HR candidate came in. Her resume was creative. It was full of buzzwords like ideation, synergy, and thought leadership. Her technical experience was thin. A couple of short stints at unknown startups and a lot of time spent on community organizing and advocacy. She walked into the interview room and immediately started talking about how her previous workplaces were toxic environments that didn't value her perspective. Robert tried to steer the conversation back to technical matters. He asked her a basic question about software architecture. She dodged it completely. She went on a long, rambling monologue about how traditional views on architecture were inherently exclusionary and that we should focus on human-centered design. She didn't write a single line of a diagram on the whiteboard. Then it was Everett's turn. He took her into the room for the coding test. 10 minutes later, Everett walked out alone. He came over to my desk. I asked him what happened. He said, "She told me the coding problem was problematic because it used a master-slave data replication analogy, and she refused to participate. The analogy is a decades-old standard industry term. It has nothing to do with people. She hadn't even attempted to solve the problem. She just used it as an opportunity to get on a soapbox." So we had two candidates. Candidate A proven expert who aced every part of the interview and could do the job from day one. Candidate B, someone with barely any relevant experience who failed the interview and spent her time complaining about the process. The choice was obvious to any rational person. Robert went into Lisa's office to give her the feedback. I saw them through the glass wall. It was a long conversation. Robert looked calm and professional, as always, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Lisa did most of the talking. She was very animated, waving her hands around. After about 30 minutes, Robert came out. He walked over to his desk, sat down, and stared at his screen for a full minute. I walked over. "So?" I asked. He looked up at me. His face was grim. "We're making an offer to candidate B." I couldn't believe it. "You're kidding, right? She's completely unqualified. She can't do the job." Robert shook his head. "It wasn't a discussion, Patrick. It was a directive." Lisa said, and I quote, "It's time this team had a different kind of voice. Her perspective is more valuable than raw technical skill." We were screwed. Utterly screwed. The new hire would need her hand held for months. That work would fall on Everett, pulling him away from critical Olympus tasks. Our project timeline was a fantasy now. All the quality and pride we had in our work was about to be flushed down the drain to satisfy our boss's ideological crusade. The next morning, Lisa sent out an email to the entire team. It was a cheerful exclamation point-filled announcement. "Team, I am so excited to announce our newest member, who will be joining us on Monday. Her unique background and forward-thinking perspective will be an incredible asset as we move into the next phase of our cultural and technical evolution. Let's all be sure to give her a warm and welcoming reception." She had attached the new hire's resume to the email. Within minutes, my private chat was blowing up. People from other teams were messaging me. "Is this for real? Did you guys actually hire her?" Everyone could see it. They could see how unqualified she was. It was a joke, but it wasn't a joke. It was our reality. Robert called a quick huddle with me and Everett. He told us to just keep our heads down, be professional, try to make it work. He said fighting it was pointless. The decision was made, but I could see the look in his eyes. It was a look of profound disappointment. The trust was broken. He had built this team from the ground up based on merit and respect, and this new boss had just spat on all of it. I spent the rest of the week in a daze. I did my work, but my heart wasn't in it. I felt this deep sense of injustice. We had worked so hard, built something so successful, and it was all being dismantled by someone who didn't care about our work, only about her agenda. I started updating my resume that weekend. I had a feeling I was going to need it. I had no idea how soon. Monday morning arrived with a sense of dread. The kind you get when you know something bad is coming, but you have no choice but to walk straight into it. Lisa sent a calendar invite for 10 a.m. "Welcome our new teammate." The entire department had to be there. Mandatory fun. We all gathered in the main conference room. The new hire was sitting next to Lisa, looking nervous. Lisa gave another one of her speeches about renewal and new perspectives. Then she introduced the new hire. Let's just call her New Girl. New Girl stood up and said a few words. She talked about her passion for disruptive thinking and how excited she was to challenge the status quo here. It was the exact same empty jargon from her resume. After the meeting, Robert walked her over to her desk, which was right next to Everett's. He gave her the standard new hire documents. "Here's the setup guide for your development environment and the link to our project's code repository. Everett can help if you run into any issues." That was the understatement of the century. For the next hour, there was silence. Then the questions started. Everett? Sorry to bother you. What's Git?" I saw Everett physically recoil. He took a deep breath, swiveled his chair around, and spent the next 30 minutes explaining the absolute basics of version control, something a first-year computer science student should know. A little while later, "Everett, I'm getting an error message when I try to run the setup script." Everett went over to her desk. I could see her screen from where I was sitting. She hadn't even opened a command line terminal. She was trying to double-click a shell script file from the desktop, GUI. Everett patiently showed her how to open the terminal and run the command. He had the patience of a saint. This went on all day, and all week. Everett's productivity went to zero. He was no longer our brilliant programmer. He was New Girl's personal on-demand tutor. He was explaining concepts to her that were so fundamental, it was like explaining what a hammer is to a carpenter. By the end of the first week, she still hadn't managed to get the project code to compile on her machine. The rest of us tried to help, to take some of the load off Everett. I tried to explain the business logic of the modules she was supposed to work on. I drew diagrams, I used analogies, I broke it down into the simplest possible terms. She would just nod and smile, but her eyes were completely blank. Nothing was sinking in. It was like pouring water into a bucket full of holes. Robert tried to give her the smallest, most isolated, non-critical bug fix he could find, just so she could get a feel for the process. The task was a simple one-line fix. It should have taken an experienced developer maybe 15 minutes. It took her 4 days, and the code she finally submitted was a mess. Everett had to spend 2 hours refactoring it just to make it acceptable enough to merge into the codebase. Meanwhile, the Olympus project was starting to fall behind. We had a major deadline approaching for a feature release. Everett was supposed to be building the core components, but he was spending all his time hand-holding New Girl. Robert had to report our slipping timeline in his weekly status update to Lisa. He was very diplomatic about it. He wrote that the team was experiencing some challenges with onboarding and that knowledge transfer was taking longer than anticipated. Lisa's response was not what we expected. She called a special meeting with just me, Robert, and Everett. She didn't ask what the technical roadblocks were. She didn't ask how she could help. She came in hot. She accused us of not creating a welcoming environment. She said that New Girl had come to her in confidence and told her that she felt the team was hostile and that she wasn't getting the support she needed. Robert tried to explain, very calmly, that Everett had been spending nearly 100% of his time supporting her. Lisa cut him off. "Support isn't just about answering technical questions, Robert. It's about emotional safety. It's about making someone feel like they belong. Perhaps if you three made more of an effort to include her, she would be able to perform at her best." I couldn't stay silent anymore. "Lisa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "With all due respect, this is an engineering problem, not an emotional one. We are behind schedule because critical development work is not getting done. New Girl currently lacks the fundamental skills required for her role. It's not a question of feeling included, it's a question of technical capability." Lisa turned her cold stare on me again. "Patrick, that kind of thinking is precisely the problem. You're reducing a person to a set of skills. You're not seeing the value she brings in other areas. Her different way of thinking is an asset, even if it doesn't fit into your narrow, traditional boxes." It was insane. We were living in a bizarro world where facts didn't matter. The meeting ended with Lisa telling us that she expected to see a significant improvement in our attitude and in New Girl's integration into the team. She said if things didn't change, she would have to consider that the problem wasn't with her, but with us. We walked out of that room completely defeated. Our boss had just told us that reality was optional. Our performance didn't matter. The success of the project didn't matter. All that mattered was propping up her failed ideological experiment. Things got worse. A week later, New Girl made her first major mistake. She was working on a small piece of code that touched the user authentication system. Everett had explicitly told her, multiple times, to only work in her own private development branch, and to ask for a code review before trying to merge anything. But she didn't listen. On a Thursday afternoon, she somehow managed to bypass the normal checks and push her unfinished broken code directly into the main development branch, the branch that was used for nightly builds and quality assurance testing. A few minutes later, all hell broke loose. Automated alerts started firing. The QA team started messaging us frantically. No one could log into the system anymore. Her change had broken the authentication for everyone. It took us almost an hour just to figure out what had happened. When we finally traced the problem back to her code commit, Robert went to find her. She wasn't at her desk. We checked her calendar. She had left an hour early for a Women in Tech Empowerment yoga session. So, there we were, me, Robert, and Everett at 6 p.m. on a Thursday, trying to untangle the mess she had created. It wasn't simple. Her changes were tangled up with other legitimate changes. We couldn't just revert everything. Everett had to meticulously go through the code, line by line, picking out her bad changes while leaving the good ones intact. We ordered a pizza to the office and worked late into the night. Around 9 p.m., we finally fixed it and got the system stable again. We were exhausted and furious. As we were packing up to leave, I asked Robert, "Are you going to tell Lisa about this?" Robert sighed. It was a heavy, tired sound. "Yes, Patrick, I have to. This isn't just a missed deadline. This was a major incident." The next morning, Robert went to Lisa's office and explained exactly what had happened. He laid out the facts, step by step. He showed her the logs, the broken code, everything. I expected Lisa to finally see the light, to finally admit that she had made a terrible mistake. I was naive. A couple of hours later, Lisa called another team meeting. She started by saying that there had been a learning opportunity the previous evening. She didn't mention New Girl by name. She said, "It has come to my attention that our development processes are not robust enough. They are too complex and unforgiving for new team members. They create an environment where it is easy to make mistakes." I almost fell out of my chair. She was blaming the process. The same process that our professional, highly skilled team had used successfully for years without a single major incident like this. She then announced that she was forming a process improvement committee to make our workflow more inclusive and accessible, and she appointed New Girl to lead it. The person who caused the problem was now in charge of fixing it. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just incompetence. It was a deliberate strategy. Lisa could not admit her chosen candidate was a failure. That would mean her ideology was wrong. So instead of addressing the source of the problem, the unqualified employee, she had to tear down everything around her to make it look like the environment was the problem. The system wasn't failing her hire. Her hire was a tool to expose the failures of the existing system. From that day on, my job changed. Lisa started micromanaging me personally. Since I was the one who had verbally questioned her in that meeting, I was now the official nail that needed to be hammered down. She would question every single detail in the technical requirement documents I wrote. "Patrick, why did you use the word execute here? It sounds aggressive. Can we find a softer word? Patrick, this user flow seems very linear. It doesn't allow for diverse user journeys. You need to be more empathetic in your design." She would CC me on dozens of irrelevant emails about marketing initiatives and diversity studies, and then grill me on them in our one-on-one meetings. "Patrick, I didn't see you comment on the article about gendered language in tech. I need to see more engagement from you on these issues." My work, which I used to take great pride in, became a soul-crushing exercise in navigating her bizarre ideological whims. I was spending more time defending my word choices than I was actually analyzing system requirements. The team saw what was happening. Robert and Everett would often pull me aside and ask if I was doing okay. They had my back, but they were powerless. Lisa was the boss. Her word was law. The Olympus project was now bleeding out. We were months behind schedule. The quality of our work was dropping, as we were all forced to spend more and more time in pointless committee meetings run by New Girl. Her process improvement meetings were a joke. She would talk for an hour about holistic workflows and empowering paradigms without offering a single concrete suggestion. Then, the email landed in our inboxes. It was from Lisa. The subject line was, "Project Olympus, a meeting for transparency and accountability." It was an invitation for a meeting with her and the vice president of our entire division. She wanted a full status report on the project. The agenda had one key item: an analysis of the root causes for the recent project delays. The meeting was in 3 days. She had listed the presenters. Robert was to give a high-level overview. Everett was to give a technical update. And I was listed as the one to present the root cause analysis. I stared at the screen. I knew exactly what this was. This was my execution. She had isolated me. She had been building a paper trail of my uncooperative behavior for weeks. She was going to stand there in front of the VP while I was forced to present a report on the project's failure. If I told the truth, that the delays were caused by her disastrous hiring decision, she would fire me on the spot for insubordination and for creating a toxic environment. If I lied and blamed technical issues or our old processes, I would be taking the fall for her. I'd be the official scapegoat. My professional reputation would be shot. It was a perfectly designed trap. I stood up and walked over to Robert's desk. He was already looking at me. He had seen the email. Everett swiveled his chair around. The three of us just looked at each other. Nothing needed to be said. This wasn't just about a bad hire anymore. This wasn't just about a delayed project. This was a loyalty test. Lisa had made her move. Now it was our turn. The next 3 days were the strangest I've ever experienced at a job. On the surface, everything was normal. We went to our desks, we typed on our keyboards, we attended the pointless meetings. But underneath, there was a silent, coiled tension. Lisa was smug. She walked around the office with a little smile, acting overly friendly to me in a way that was clearly designed to be unsettling. She was a predator who had cornered her prey and was now just enjoying the moment before the final pounce. Me, Robert, and Everett didn't talk about the upcoming meeting in the office. We knew better. Instead, we went out for lunch, away from the building, away from any listening ears. We sat at a small table in a noisy diner. I was the one who spoke first. So, this is it. She's going to throw me under the bus in front of the VP. Everett, who rarely spoke up about anything other than code, looked at me and said, "It's not right. You've done nothing wrong." Robert just stirred his coffee, staring into the cup. He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up, and his eyes were clear and calm. He wasn't angry. He was resolved. He looked at me and said, "You're not going to be the only one in that room, Patrick." Then he looked at Everett. "None of us will be." He didn't elaborate. He just laid out a very simple plan. Not a plan for revenge, a plan for the truth. He told me to prepare my root cause analysis presentation, but he told me to prepare 2 versions of it. Version A was the corporate-friendly lie, the one Lisa expected me to deliver, full of vague terms like unexpected complexities and resource allocation challenges. The version where I took the blame. Version B was the truth. A simple, factual, unemotional timeline of events, starting from the day we interviewed the 2 candidates. No accusations, no opinions, just the facts, backed by data. Project velocity before new girl, project velocity after. Number of critical bugs before, number after. Hours of senior developer time spent on mentoring versus new development. "You'll have both ready," Robert said, "and you'll know which one to present when the time comes." That was it. We finished our lunch and went back to work. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I just kept going over the 2 presentations. My stomach was in knots. I felt like I was standing on a cliff, and I had to choose which direction to jump. The next morning, I walked into the office wearing my best suit. I don't know why, it just felt like the right thing to do. I saw Robert and Everett had done the same. We looked like we were either going to a wedding or a funeral. At 10 a.m., we walked into the big boardroom on the executive floor. The VP was already there. He was an older guy, a company lifer who had come up through the engineering ranks. He was known for being a no-nonsense, results-oriented leader. Lisa was there too, sitting next to him, looking confident and in charge. She gave us a tight, fake smile as we sat down. The meeting started. Robert gave his overview. He was professional and to the point. He presented the project's successes in the past and its current stalled state. Then Everett gave his technical update. He showed charts and graphs. The data was damning. Our output as a team had fallen off a cliff in the last 2 months. Throughout their presentations, Lisa kept nodding sympathetically, occasionally interjecting with comments like, "And this is why we need to rethink our legacy systems," trying to frame the failure as a confirmation of her theories. The VP listened intently, saying nothing, just taking notes. Then it was my turn. Lisa gave me a little, "You can do it," smile, the kind a spider gives to a fly. "And now," she said to the VP, "Patrick will walk us through his root cause analysis of the challenges we've been facing." I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I connected my laptop to the projector. I took a deep breath. I looked at Robert. He gave me a very slight, almost imperceptible nod. I opened a file. It was version B. I began to speak. My voice was steady. The root cause of the project's recent performance decline is not a single issue, but a sequence of events. Let's walk through the timeline. I started on the date of the job interviews. I showed the qualifications of candidate A side by side with the qualifications of candidate B. I didn't use names, just the facts. I saw Lisa's smile falter. She shifted in her chair. I moved to the next slide. It was a chart showing Everett's code commits per week, a straight productive line for months. And then, on the week New Girl started, it dropped to almost zero. It was replaced by a log of all the basic technical support questions he had answered for her, which we had been privately documenting. Lisa's face started to lose its color. She tried to interrupt. "Patrick, I'm not sure this level of detail is productive." The VP held up a hand to silence her. He was leaning forward now, his eyes glued to the screen. He just said, "Let him continue." I went to the next slide. It detailed the critical authentication bug incident. I showed the time it happened, the code that caused it, and the fact that the developer responsible had left for the day. I showed the time logs of me, Robert, and Everett working until 9 p.m. to fix it. I didn't say New Girl caused it. I just presented the evidence. The data spoke for itself. I finished with a final summary slide that showed the project was now 3 months behind schedule, directly correlating with the hiring of an unqualified team member and the subsequent diversion of our most critical engineering resources to support her. I ended my presentation. That concludes the root cause analysis. I turned away from the screen and looked directly at Lisa. Her face was a mask of pure, cold rage. The friendly corporate facade was gone. She was seething. Before the VP could even speak, she stood up and pointed a shaking finger at me. Her voice was sharp and loud. "This is completely unacceptable. This is a vindictive and unprofessional personal attack. Patrick has been a source of negativity and resistance since the day I arrived, and this is just the final proof of his toxic attitude." She turned to the VP. "I cannot have someone like this on my team. He is actively sabotaging our department's culture. I'm exercising my authority as his manager. Patrick, you're fired. Get your things. You're done here." The room was dead silent. She stood there, panting slightly, looking triumphant. She had finally done it. She had publicly executed me. She thought she had won. I didn't say a word. I just calmly started to pack up my laptop. I didn't look at her. But then something happened that she did not expect. Robert, who had been sitting silently this whole time, slowly stood up. He took his company ID badge from around his neck. He looked not at Lisa, but at the VP. He placed the badge gently on the polished boardroom table. "I resign," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Effective immediately." Lisa's jaw dropped. She stared at him, speechless. Before the shock could even register, Everett stood up too. He was a kid who hated confrontation. He was visibly nervous, but he did it anyway. He took off his badge and placed it on the table right next to Robert's. "Me too," he whispered, so quietly we could barely hear him. "I also resign." Lisa just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The color had completely drained from her face. She looked from the 2 badges on the table to the 2 men standing there, and then to me as I closed my laptop bag. She had just fired the team's analyst. Her team lead and her star programmer had just quit in front of the Division 5P. The entire core of the billion-dollar Olympus project had just evaporated in the space of 30 seconds. She was left with a handful of junior developers and her one, completely incompetent diversity hire. I slung my bag over my shoulder. As I walked past the table, I took out my own badge and added it to the pile, a neat little stack of protest. I walked out of that boardroom without a single look back. Robert and Everett fell into step right behind me. We didn't say a word as we walked to the elevators. We rode down to our floor in silence. When the doors opened, the rest of the department was there, looking confused. The news was already spreading like wildfire. We walked to our desks, packed our personal belongings into small cardboard boxes, and walked out of that building for the last time. We didn't have to be escorted out by security. We just left. Later that afternoon, the 3 of us met at a nearby bar. We sat there for a while, just drinking a beer, letting the adrenaline wear off. Then, for the first time that day, we started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. The burden we had been carrying for months was finally gone. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a friend at our old company's biggest competitor. "Heard you guys might be on the market. My boss wants to talk to all three of you, tomorrow. I showed the text to Robert and Everett. Robert read it, and a real, genuine smile spread across his face. He raised his glass. To the Olympus team. We all clinked our glasses together. To the team. A week later, I checked Lisa's profile on LinkedIn out of morbid curiosity. Her job title at our old company now had an end date next to it. Below it, in that sad gray font, were the words, "Open to new opportunities." She hadn't just lost her 3 best employees, she had lost her job. The VP had seen everything he needed to see. The truth had a way of doing that. We ended up taking the offer from the competitor. They hired us as a package deal to work on a new project from the ground up. More money, better title, and a boss who actually cared about building good products. We built a new team, on our own terms, based on one simple principle: merit. It turns out that when you build a team based on talent and mutual respect, instead of ideology and resentment, you can actually get some pretty great work done. Funny how that works.